language, we look back at why and how we loved Minder.
Well, for a start, is it nicked?
Terry.
It's old, isn't it?
Yeah, mid-19th century, yeah.
Well, it's an ornament. It's a statue. It's a geezer.
To the punter, what you are holding, Terry, is worth 80 quid.
Is it really? Yeah, it's nice, isn't it? Handsome. Bet you wish you had 100.
Too gross.
In 1979, a drama series introduced us to an odd couple who earned their crust on the fringes of London's underworld.
It wasn't like work, it was fun.
I've got a mate who's got a souvenir shop not far from Stamford Bridge, but he'll knock them out for me as Chelsea footballers. Leave it out.
It was a show that brought whole new words and phrases into the English language, beginning with the word minder.
You know, emptied pubs. I mean, the bloke who brought me here today was saying that when it was on his pub, they thought the only way around it was to get a TV in the bar, and so people would stay in the pub.
After a dodgy start, it went on to bestride television like a veritable colossus from 1979 until 1994.
It was vast. I think something like 800 actors and actresses appeared in Minder.
Minder was so groundbreaking that when it first appeared on TV, we had to find a new term to describe it.
Could be quite tough and you know, there'd be action sequences and then suddenly it'd be quite sad.
You only take out of life what you put into it, plus a little extra if you can find a few mugs.
I wish everyone had your sense of humanity often.
The Minder story begins in 1971 when George Taylor and Lloyd Shirley set up Euston Films as the strong dramatic arm of Thames TV. Euston's brief was to bring the production values of hard Hollywood movies like The French Connection to the streets of London. They had immediate success with the series' special branch and feature-length armchair cinemas, one of which starred John Thaw as flying squad officer Jack Regan. Euston developed Regan into a series for ITV and it blew people away.
Who are you? We're the Sweeney, son, and we haven't had any dinner.
Sweeney just bashed onto the air. We were totally different, you know. We were proving that the cops were as tough as the baddies.
In among the pool of acting talent called on to make guest appearances in the Sweeney were the veteran character actor George Cole.
Industrial espionage? Not a chance.
And a new face, Patrick Malahide.
Eureka.
Euston Films had this reputation for doing sort of real in-the-street stuff. And in fact, it was all up close and personal. In fact, we used to have a thing, you know, that we used to say, what size is the shot? And they'd say, oh, it's the Euston Salute, which means that.
The Sweeney made ITV governors very happy as advertising revenues flowed in. So when John Thaw decided to knock Regan on the head, there were wails of anguish from Euston Films.
You're nicked.
Help came from a legendary figure in TV drama. Verity Lambert was the first producer of Doctor Who in the 60s and time travelled to Thames TV, where her name appeared on such solid successes as Budgie, The Naked Civil Servant and Rock Follies. In 1978, she took over Euston Films, and with Linda Agron, a story editor recruited from Warner Pictures, they set about trying to replace the Sweeney.
Dennis was quite keen, if we could find the right vehicle for him, to make another television series.
I was talking to writers, going out, getting drunk with writers, which is basically what you have to do. Feeding writers and their families, and desperately looking for the next big thing.
Various ideas being thrown around. And then another piece of luck, you know, coincidentally, Leon Griffith sent them 6 storylines, a couple of sort of 2 completed scripts, and a load of other storylines about a thing called Minder. What's a Minder?
Leon Griffiths was one of the most versatile writers around who could turn his hand to anything, from crime movies like The Grissom Gang and The Squeeze to the private eye series Hazel. In 1978, Griffiths wrote Dinner at the Spotting Club, a BBC play for today, which was also John Thaw's first role after the Sweeney.
Now remember, what you've got to do is grab the centre of the ring, make him move. You win this one, everything's possible. You got that?
everything.
The only two characters, I think, that appeared in the treatment of Minder were Arthur Daley and Terry. Leon had somehow managed, because he was a very good writer, to bring those characters to life, which is extremely difficult.
Verity Lambert thought Arthur Daley's Minder, Terry McCann, would be the perfect part for Dennis Waterman. By the time Dennis burst through the door in The Sweeney, he'd already been acting for nearly 20 years. He made his first film appearance in Night Train for Inverness in 1960.
Can I have anything I like, Daddy?
Well, there are a menu if you want.
Trains always make me hungry. Grapefruit? With lots of sugar?
Yeah, all the sugar you want.
Waterman played the first of many naughty boys as TV's Just William in 1962. His late teens and early 20s were spent making great movies like Up the Junction, or less great movies like School for Unclaimed Girls. In 1972, he returned to TV with the BBC series The Sextet.
I have a strong appetite for sex, you see. She satisfied it. That's why I went along with this secret lover bit. Well, with people about most of the time, I didn't have to talk to it. Or I could really say what I meant, and that was putting people off the scent.
His Sextet co-stars included a man who put the character into British acting, Denham Elliott. And Dennis thought Denham would be the perfect man to support him as Arthur Daley in Minder.
I thought he would be interesting and a good idea, you know, he's a fantastic actor.
And I said, you absolutely mustn't cast Denham. And much as I love him, he's a wonderful actor, but I don't think he's right.
Huge arguments. I mean, really, really huge arguments. I remember at one point a script flying past my ear.
George's name came up, George Cole, which I thought was brilliant. And I said, we've got to cast George Cole. Nobody else wanted to cast him.
And I kind of was a bit worried because I thought he was too posh, which was dopey because Denham's much posher than George, in fact.
And I said, well, you know, didn't anyone watch the St. Trinian's film? I mean, he's, you know, he can do anything.
George Cole was born in Tooting, down the road from Clapham Boy Dennis. Like him, George had got the acting bug early. In fact, shortly after reading an advert in the evening news on his paper round.
Small boy wanted for London musical. And it was a address in, just off Shaftesbury Avenue. So Saturday morning, I went up and auditioned for the part. And I didn't get the part, but I got the understudy. But the only thing was I had to go to Blackpool immediately that day. So I sent a telegram to my parents saying, I've gone on the stage, we'll write. It was 9 words for sixpence in those days.
In 1941, an unmistakable George Cole made his film debut, aged 16, in Cottage to Let.
I'm Ronald. I'm evacuated. Oh, how do you do, Ronald? Pleased to meet you, I'm sure.
1944 brought a royal summons to appear in Laurence Olivier's Henry V. After this, Cole was soon established as a familiar face in British cinema. In 1954, his most celebrated film role came in the St. Trinian series, where he played a man by the name of Flash Harry.
Do you mind telling me what you do?
I tried. Gin, nylons, anything.
Really?
Characters like Flash Harry had been a staple in the music hall since the war. The Genuine article had appeared selling hooky goods on the streets of London during the early 40s. The trail of nylons and dodgy motors inevitably leads to Arthur Daley 40 years later, but in 1978 he was still just a few lines on a piece of paper. That is, until Verity and Linda arranged to meet George Cole.
I will never, ever forget the moment that he walked into the bar. It was Arthur Daley. And I remember sitting there and thinking, I could barely talk. I was so excited at this physical manifestation of Arthur Daley.
I mean, there was a description of him as being behind the present Home Secretary as far as law and order was concerned. His favourite film was The Godfather, and he dressed like a dodgy member of the Citizens Advice Bureau. And that was enough for me.
Terry, remember what I said? Best behaviour,
With
right?
George Cole on board, filming began in 1979, and on the 29th of October, viewers got their first taste of Terry McCann and Arthur Daley.
All right, I come from good peasant stock. I know my position in life.
There is no need for that attitude, Terry. It's just that the gentry, well, they're different from the likes of you and, well, from the likes of you.
Terry, of course, was an interesting character because he was the supposed hard man, but because had been a boxer and he had accidentally injured someone very badly in a fight and had gone to prison, he actually hated violence.
There was a great line in one of them that he got hooked up with Daley, and he worked for him because Daley had done him a favour once, although neither of them can remember what it was.
Right, don't keep on, it's done, innit?
The way the characters developed wasn't always for artistic reasons. Arthur Daley's gift for self-preservation was at least partly based on the limitations imposed by the wardrobe budget.
Where's my money, Arthur?
I haven't got it.
The young director was directing a fight sequence. And he said, no, as they come round the corner fighting, I want you to go in with your fists flying. And I took him to one side and I said, do you know how much this suit cost? So he said, well, what do you suggest? I said, well, as the fight comes round the corner, this way, I suggest I go off quietly that way, which I did. And the scriptwriters kept the myth of Arthur's cowardice alive.
Give him the money! Do what?
But to start with, the programme's mixture of Sweeney-style violence and character-based comedy led to some confusion about what Minder actually was. The first series got bad reviews and even worse audience figures.
I think it did quite confuse a few people, that didn't know whether it was a comedy or a real joke, or, you know, serious with comedy.
Nowadays, the comedy drama is standard TV fare, but back in 1979, the idea was unheard of. Thames TV's MD, Brian Cowgill, wasn't in the business of funding new inventions, and his advertisers were looking for the biggest audiences they could find. Verity Lambert had to talk him into commissioning a second series.
I did go to Brian and say to him, look, I know this programme is going to work. I know the ratings haven't been that good on the first series, but this is really going to be a programme that will work, and I stake my job on it.
We were convinced what we were making was good, but we weren't sure the audience was going to be there. And then, of course, tragedy struck, and Leon had a stroke.
While Leon Griffiths recuperated, occasional writers like Tony Hoare were brought in as regulars, and Tony brought his unique experience of London's underworld with him.
My biggest regret when I was away in prison, right, my biggest regret was not making notes around the exercise yard, because you had like a dozen amazing stories every day. Should have written them down, you know, I got a fortune.
Tony Hoare's speciality was delivering scripts that were humorous and full of realistic scams. In an episode called Poetic Justice, Innit, Hoare called on his own experience of courtroom drama for a story about Arthur Daley on jury service.
Yes, Mr. Daley, Your Lordship. Arthur Edward Daley. Yes.
Arthur goes up and he makes himself foreman of the jury, as he would, you know. And the guy in the dock was a pal of his. And he was bent to rights, but he's one of Arthur's own. And what he does is what the guy did in 12 Angry Men. He turns them all around.
Out there is a fellow human being whose very future hangs on our decision. Not to mention his own mum, who's dependent on him.
And it was also a message because that kind of thing goes on in jury rooms. If a strong character takes over the jury, his will is imposed.
Well, that's an improvement anyway, isn't it?
By the time Series 3 arrived, Minder had turned the corner and become an enormous ratings success. Verity Lambert's job was safe, and I Could Be So Good For You reached number 3 in the charts.
You sensed something was happening when taxi drivers started saying, how's her indoors? Or complaining about the fact that I didn't pay Terry enough money.
The enormous strength of the series was the highly watchable relationship between Dennis and George. Ian Toynton started out as an editor on The Sweeney and went on to direct and produce Minder, so he saw the relationship working at first hand.
The one thing I do remember about both of them, there was a great generosity in their performance. They would give each other their lines if it made the scene better.
Listen, Arthur, I told you I'm busy today.
So what am I, contagious all of a sudden? I can't pay a friendly visit?
And I'm not humping any dodgy booze about either.
Dodgy booze? You're beginning to sound like Dave. No, that's all done and delivered.
So what do you want then?
Want? I don't want anything.
Oh, come on. You don't make social visits.
Hey, yeah.
Why does Terry tolerate Arthur? But he does, and he likes him, even though he knows that there are times when he's going to do something terrible.
Terry? You all right?
Bastard!
What?
You... stupid
I don't know why you're taking that attitude. Just because there was a mix-up in communications. Plate the chicken vindaloo, you'll be as right as ninepence.
Conflict is drama, isn't it? So you had conflict. You always had a nice conflict thing going on. Terry needs the money. You know what I mean? Arthur keeps conning him in it because he's a nice guy and he gives in and then he gets into trouble and there's an ongoing thing, you know.
In Minder, Terry McCann boozed, brawled and bed-hopped his way to the position of Britain's #1 lad. Not that Terry McCann's antics bear any resemblance to those of the real Dennis Waterman, obviously.
No wicked for the peaceful, is there?
And Dennis's character, I think, was just someone that we all wanted to know. I mean, he was just a great guy. He was a guy you wanted to go and have a drink with, as we often did.
And whenever Terry and Arthur fancied a drink, they went to the Winchester, a club based on Leon Griffith's own exclusive boozer.
I mean, it was full of villains, the club. And in fact, I remember once Leon's, we were sitting there having a drink, and Leon said, you see that guy over there by the bar? And I said, yeah. He said, well, he knocked over Tesco's last week and came in here and bought everybody a drink.
Leon Griffiths didn't just turn his local boozer into Minder's Winchester Club, he also turned the real barman into a character so good they only named him once.
What's the geezer's name of the bar?
Dave.
Dave? Dave, do you do a margarita cocktail?
I do a gin and tonic cocktail, a whiskey and dry ginger cocktail, a Bacardi and Coke with ice and a twist of lemon. And that's your lot.
Like George Cole, Glyn Edwards had spent most of his career acting in the service of the British film industry. In 1964, he fought alongside Michael Caine in Zulu and worked with him again in The Ipcress File and Get Carter. Like all actors, Glyn hoped the script that arrived through his letterbox was for a series all about a barman called Dave.
I kept turning the page over. Then we came, Winchester Club. I thought, here we go. Here comes my big scene. And there I was behind the bar. George Cole wandered in. Hi, Dave. Arthur. VAT? Yep, I'll put it on the slate. Right. And he walked away from the bar. And that was it.
Dave was useful because you could relate, you could push the story on through Dave. Oh, so-and-so come in, so-and-so rung, blah, blah, blah. So instead of having to see all those things, you could cut to the chase, you know. And it was quite a good device.
I always felt about Dave in that he was very lucky because of the concept of her indoors, who was never seen.
Oh, get out with you, Arthur.
Winchester Club, can I help you? Oh. Yes, dear. It's me, your nearest and dearest.
So that Dave took over that sort of role about the cautionary, helpful friend.
Another Winchester regular, though drink like a smile never crossed his lips, was Sergeant Charlie Chisholm, played by Patrick Malahide. Chisholm gave Tony Hoare the chance to depict the police he knew and loved.
Have a look, it's cheerful Charlie.
And it's very typical of me to make the cops look a bit silly, you know, years of prejudice kind of thing, you know. But, you know, it's daft cops, same as there's daft villains. They were both daft.
Mind a Christmas party. It was the first sort of Christmas party we ever had. I met Tony Hoare. And he came up to me, he says, oh, you fucking beauty. He said, you just like the that nicked me.
If he'd had one, Chisholm would have sold his soul to the devil to collar Arthur Daley. In the episode Goodbye Sailor, also featuring a new romantic Ray Winston, Malahide nearly paid the price of losing his Niagaras. That's Niagara Falls.
Well. Wild bunches back in town.
Mr. Chisholm, what a pleasant surprise.
The scene ended up in the Winchester, as always. And Chisholm thinks he's finally nailed it, because there in the middle is the evidence, and there's this bag.
Do you mind? No, carry on.
Now, obviously, I knew it was an inflatable rifle as an actor, and I said to them, what happens when I do this? And they said, oh, it'll be all right, it just sort of inflates slowly. Wow, blimey, no, it don't explode. And it lifts me off the ground, and I go absolutely white, and sort of stagger to the bar and lean on it, and they were really worried. I think they thought I was going to sue them. The only time I was ever offered a gin and tonic. Oh, come into the producer's office, Patrick. Gin and tonic, perhaps? Thank you very much.
By the end of the third series, Minder was a regular presence at the top of the TV ratings charts, but the balance of the programme was shifting. It was called Minder, yet the character everyone talked about was Arthur Daley.
It was a nightmare for George, who is a very, very private man. And of course, every taxi, every lorry, every car would screech to a halt. People would yell, "Hello, Arthur."
Then the other worrying thing was I got invited to lunch at Scotland Yard, which I found very odd. And when I got a taxi and I said, "Scotland Yard," and he said, "Don't muck about, where do you want to go?" That was very strange. Very nice lunch.
So why did we fall in love with a dodgy old geezer with a lust for lolly and the deep moral emptiness of a post-war London spiv? Like everything else in the 1980s, it was the fault of her indoors at number 10.
It was a grab-it-as-fast-as-you-can society then, you know. Yuppies were invented, and he was an elderly yuppie.
No, if you want to see a really professional entrepreneur, look at her at number 10.
A very clever woman.
Clever? Bloody genius. I mean, who else could have done what she's done? I mean, she has sold the nation a whole host of things they already owned. Gas, phones, oil.
And I just think there was something wonderful about, there was her preaching all this free market capitalism, and there in Fulham, where was this dodgy guy in a camel-haired suit talking about entrepreneurship, and he couldn't even pronounce it.
You fancy her, don't you?
I do not. Now get a move on.
You do. You said to Dave...
I said it was a meeting of minds. Though I do have to admit she does have womanly qualities.
You're disgusting.
I think people enjoyed having a laugh at Minder because they were sort of saying 2 fingers up to the government.
Like the Conservative Party, Minder was unstoppable in the 80s. But by the end of Series 6, Waterman and Cole were ready for their own projects. Dennis made the leap from the sexually supercharged Terry to cheating husband Bobo in The Life and Loves of a She-Devil, while George also went off to the BBC to play Sir Giles Lynchwood in Blot on the Landscape.
And there was a lot of rather salacious stuff. And I thought, well, no, this is the BBC, so that won't be in. How wrong I was. It was all in.
Are you comfortable, Sir G? Oh. You look it. Well, now then, we all know what happens to naughty garçons, don't we? Oh, yes, you are, you know you are.
When Dennis and George returned to Minder, it would be Dennis's last appearance as Terry McCann. The world of the Winchester wasn't the same, and regulars were leaving. Verity Lambert was in Australia, making the feature A Cry in the Dark. Leon Griffiths, Linda Agren and Ian Toynton were all working on the wartime miniseries A Piece of Cake. Meanwhile, Britain's love-hate relationship with Mrs Thatcher had tipped over into hate, and there was a new, if not healthier, climate for Minder to cope with.
There was political correctness everywhere, and, you know, which made it very difficult. You know, Leon wouldn't have been able to write in that atmosphere of the same series.
Things changed when, for instance, the AIDS scare came along. I think there was some sort of directive that said Terry must not jump into bed with every girl he meets. So that cut down on some of that stuff.
You know, you weren't getting into situations that were dangerous and, you know, gritty, whatever you want to call them, so there was no point in having a Minder in a way.
I am informed by Dave that for some incomprehensible reason, you have got the up with me. Well, actually, I'm somewhat bewildered.
Stop, just stop, will you? Before you go into one, let me tell you this, son. I'm not interested, right? You and me are finished.
I mean, when they then went on to do another series without me, I mean, I suggested they call it Arthur Daley's Diary because, you know, it was dopey calling it Minder because it wasn't Minder. It was about Arthur Daley then. And I say there's no jealousy.
I see. That's my reward, is it? That's the gratitude I get for years of loyal friendship. A dagger in the back, that's what I get for my unselfish succour and support of you along life's hazardous highways.
You know, the writers wanted to write Arthur Daley rather than, you know, the rather more two-dimensional Terry.
Treachery, that's my take-home pay. How much is Charlie asking for these chairs?
Dennis Waterman decided not to do another series of Minder after Series 7. In 1989, he starred as a Cockney ex-con alongside Jan Francis in Stay Lucky, and a year later he went into sitcom in 3 series of On the Up. Back at Euston, Ian Toynton was now producing Minder, still under its original title, and the actor given the onerous task of filling Dennis's Daisy roots was Gary Webster, better known previously as Graham Clark in EastEnders.
Say hello to Arthur, Ray.
Hello, Arthur. Uncle Arthur. Dennis and George were like husband and wife towards the end, a bickering kind of at each other's throats all the time, whereas Ray and Arthur were more like father and son.
Does he often go on like this, Bert?
Oh, he's got an O-level in woodwork and one in...
French?
French, yeah.
Oh, I remember that if I want any Louis XVII's chairs made.
It wasn't the same, was it? Everyone, you stop people in the street and they'd all say, yeah, but it ain't the same without Dennis, is it? You know, no reflection on Gary, but, you know, how can he compete?
The new Minder competed with the old one well enough to keep the franchise going for another 3 series. But reality finally caught up with Minder, and it was cancelled by Thames shortly before the company itself bit the dust.
Great, Arthur.
The last episode, written by Tony Hoare, was screened in March 1994.
Nice one, Arthur.
I remember a shot, and I thought it was the very last shot, which was Arthur being taken away in a police van. That is the image that I wanted us to go out on, and just to hear this voice and just to be able to, in our own way, cut in his close-up.
Why me? Why me? Have I not always conducted my life with decency and dignity? Have the time-honoured values of yesteryear deteriorated to the point where there is no place left in the black economy for men of vision?
It was sad. It was sad in a lot of ways. It was an end. In a way, it was an end of an era.
After Minder, George Cole settled back into character parts, appearing in the movie Mary Riley in 1996, and he returned to TV in the 1997 sitcom Dad. Dennis Waterman came back to our screens in the comedy drama New Tricks, alongside fellow TV veterans James Bolam, Alan Armstrong and Amanda Redman.
Amanda and I did a musical together in the 80s, and where we'd known each other really quite well, but it's just that it really is the best fun you can have with your clothes on doing this show. It's great.
You see, periodically, the women in my life compare me to other men they've known, and then throw a nice little supper in my honour.
For you, or at you?
But it's all character-based. I've got 3 wives, 4 daughters, and a gambling problem and womanising problem. Don't know why they cast me, because I don't gamble.
The theme tune for New Tricks was performed by a Mr. D. Waterman. It's a service Dennis has provided for several of the shows he's starred in, and a talent that's been lovingly immortalised in the show Little Britain.
Sonia Chance, the new head of ITV, has requested a brand new series of Minder to go into production in the spring. Would Dennis be interested?
I don't want any more.
Oh, well, just give it here.
To make me that big, I didn't quite understand. And I don't care one way or the other, but I also, just on a humour thing, I don't find it very... There's nothing very funny comes out of it. It's just a dopey midget saying I want to sing the theme tune.
Oh, so you want me to reprise my role as Terry McCann? Write the theme tune, sing the theme tune? No, thanks, I've moved on.
And I'm not sure what my agent thinks. I haven't asked him if he thinks that it's a likeness of him as well.
But his reputation is safe. Between them, Dennis Waterman and George Cole have made hundreds of memorable film and TV appearances. But for George Cole, only one has had the solid copper-bottomed class to appeal to punters the world over.
In the Australian Parliament, somebody asked the Prime Minister if they could have a recess so that they could go home and watch Minder. And he said, no, certainly not. You do the same as I do. You record it. So that was very nice.
Those shoes, are they snakeskin?
No, they're leather.
Look, I have spent about...
I bet.
Terry, they are...
Oh, Terry!
Who's a pretty boy?
Watch this. It'll be top.